gonna need a drill, some drill bits, a screwdriver for the Phillips head screws that hold the mount into place at the bottom here, and we're gonna need some basic wiring tools, so crimpers, strippers, those sorts of things. So if you're gonna do this install yourself, make sure you're prepared with those tools. And yeah, we're gonna try to give you a little bit of a step-by-step installation guide here. So here we go. A little bit of a learning experience for me. Did have to go ahead and remove the gauge surround from the actual cluster itself in order to get this lid off. There's two very large posts underneath this that need to be pulled over the column, and you have to kind of force it a little bit, but if you're careful you can get it off without breaking it, and that's the ultimate goal. So now that we've got that apart, we've got our old gauge. There was actually an old boost gauge that was already in this car. We've got that just kind of dangling here. So we'll go ahead and get that disconnected. And the nice part about that is we're gonna be able to reuse the vacuum line that runs to that, sends the boost pressure reading to the gauge itself. So we won't have to reroute that, which is nice, and maybe we could even steal the power from it. So we'll see. So we've got the pod mounted on top of our clamshell. It's all secure and straight as an arrow. Used a little bit of tape and things, as you guys saw. Drilled a 3/16 holes and sent it. So we're all set to go back in the car now, and we'll go ahead and grab the gauges and get them fitted here on the bench. And then we can go in and start working on the wiring. All right, we've got the gauges all wired up now, kind of tidied up behind the gauges themselves. Everything is going to get routed through the firewall. Like I said earlier, we do have a gauge that was already in this car, so we're going to be able to actually steal the power, ground, and switch features from that. So that should be pretty straightforward. If you didn't already have a gauge mounted in your car, you're going to need to find power source, a switched power source, and a ground to ground the gauges. We're just going to go ahead and tap into what we've already got here. So this is actually going to be a pretty straightforward install. The hardest part is going to be actually routing these sensors up to the front of the car. So the boost and the oil temperature, we have to mount a provision in the engine to tap a sensor into. So we're going to go ahead and get started on that. All right, so the boost gauge is all mounted up. We've got the sensor here that has the vacuum line routed to it, and then it sends signal back to the gauge inside the car. There was a nice grommet in the firewall underneath the brake booster that we used to route the cabling through that, and the boost sending unit gets its vacuum from over here off of the blow-off valve, where it tees off the vacuum and it runs up here underneath the battery tray and then up underneath the sending unit here. So that is now complete. We can now move on. This is the sensor that's reading temperature on our oil. This is the bung that gets screwed into the block, and you can see it comes through there and actually measures the temperature of the oil, sends the information off to the gauge, and we can then know on our dash what our engine oil temperature is. So there's a cable routes from the back of the gauge out to the block. I'm going to plug that bung into the block with the sensor, plug that in, and then we're off to the gauges to give them power, and we're good to go.
Fatality.
All right, so we got you shut up. Anyhow, so went ahead and got the sensor in place. Go ahead and try to show that to you guys here. A little hard to see, but it is right, that nice shiny thing down there. It's not wanting to focus on it, but at any rate, we found a plug in the block right there. It's below the intake manifold for those of you guys that are gonna actually do this installation, and the plug looks like this. I don't know if it's focusing on that, but autofocus FTL. But yeah, you want to break that loose. It is a metric 8 6-sided guy, and yeah, remove that, put the bung in, and then reach down there and put the sensor in. Now that the sensor's in, we're going to go ahead and run the actual plug that was run through the firewall. I've got it just terminated here for now, but we're going to go ahead and run that across behind the beer holder and down to the sensor down there. So this actually mechanically will be done here in a few minutes, and then we have to go in and actually do the wiring at the back of the gauges to give them power. So we're close. This install is taking a little longer than usual, and I understand that we have some shortcuts because we already had a boost gauge in the car, so there's already a vacuum line around and those sorts of things. But this installation is taking, I think we're going on about an hour and a half now. So just know that it's not a quick and dirty install. This is something that actually, if you route everything properly and you set everything up properly, it does take a little bit of time. But as with anything, take your time, do it right. It turns out nice, and you'll be happy. So I'm gonna go ahead and start on the wiring inside the car. All right, we're all wired up in the engine bay. Time to move on to the interior.
A few minutes later.
All right, guys, so went ahead and got the gauges wired up. We got a power ground, switch power, and yeah, we're good to go. So let's go ahead and put the key in the ignition. I've already buttoned up the column and everything so that this is how the gauges look. The wiring is back here, it's kind of hidden. What isn't hidden is actually nice and tied up. Let's go ahead, cross your fingers, see what we got. Hey, we got power. Whoa, yep, hey, there we go. So obviously these are gonna need some adjustment. I'll probably need to clock them a little bit. They look pretty straight, but we'll go ahead and fine tune on those. We are really close to the steering wheel in the back, so I might have to put a small little spacer in there just so we don't have any contact with the steering wheel. But all in all, pretty pumped on the way these look and the way they turned out. I like how they have a full sweep when you start, or when you turn the key in the on position. Let's go ahead and start this thing up. Little oil temp gauge. So we can get some temperature in this thing before we rev her up, but definitely seeing boost. I'm gonna go ahead and let it warm up, see if we've got oil temperature, and make sure that our boost gauge is working properly. And I'm gonna call it a night. It's been a long day. Luckily this gauge install was pretty easy thanks to the nice components from Perrin. They made it as simple as possible to get this thing hooked up. And also because we already had a vacuum line routed for the original boost gauge, it made things a little easier. So at any rate, that's a wrap on the day. Hope you enjoyed this WRX content, as we're doing a little bit at a time to make this car awesome and give it away to one of our lucky VIP members. So that's a wrap, boys and girls. I'm gonna head home, pop a cold one, and relax. Adios.